Thanks to AwesomeX.com for sponsoring The Bridge with Kira. Supercharge your immunity with LB17 and the other fine products at AwesomeX.com. OSUMEX.com.
Well, hey, I, oh, well, hey, oh, well, hey, I, oh, well, hey, oh, well, hey, I, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, well, hey, I, oh, well, hey, oh, well, hey, I, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, well, hey, I, oh, well, hey, oh, well, hey, I, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh. All right, we're back, and we really do have Ryan Redcorn on with me tonight. Welcome, Ryan, and
Hello.
thanks so much for coming on. I'm glad that we could at least have an hour to really get into some of the great work that you're doing. Most people know you from your sketch comedy that you're doing with the 1491s. So let's start with that first before we get into a lot of the other stuff that you're doing.
Okay.
I've heard you talk about these comedy sketches as wrapping the truth into more of a palatable medium, because some of the stuff that you're exploring, not only is it some long-standing memes in Indian country, but it's some hard stuff. It's stuff that we're still working out in Indian country. So, let's talk about that a little bit. Some of the memes that you're looking at in this comedy is like blood quantum, for instance. That's a huge thing. And the I'm more Indianer than you, that's a huge thing too. And it has a funny side, but it has another side to it too that's sort of steeped in injury. So where do you want to go with that? Let's start
Well,
with
I mean, we made the blood quantum thing as a specific reaction to the way when we came out with that one, we had a few videos out and people were really bringing that up over and over and over again, and it's something that was not intentional on our part. It was a byproduct of a reality. And so the reality is, not all indigenous people look the same. They don't all look like they walked off the set of Dances with Wolves. And, we are who we are and who we're surrounded by and who we marry and who we don't marry and all that. And so we just look how we look. And by putting all of us in one place at one time, people began that conversation, which is really just a byproduct of us not having any money and the ability to have a casting call and, go through and weed out all the people that don't look how there's people think they're supposed to look. So the blood quantum thing wasn't really, that's never really been like an intentional thing. I guess specifically for me, like I didn't really have to deal with it until I left the reservation. I mean, everybody here knows who my family is. They know who my grandparents are. They know who my dad is. They know who my uncles are, my aunts, and we all come in different shapes, sizes, and colors. And it just really wasn't a big deal, I guess, to me until I left to Kansas. So, I mean, and here I've already had to talk about it for about 5 minutes already, so I don't know really what you want me to say about
No,
blood
this is
quantum.
great. This is great.
Yeah,
I'm sure you got, like, once you left the reservation, you went to college in Kansas, and people
yeah,
were like, well, you don't look Indian. And you're just like, really? Do you know a lot of Indians? And then they're like, well, no. Then, so it really uncovers how it's from, Hollywood that
yeah,
Americans
yeah.
come to think
Yeah,
of.
it wasn't really like you don't look Indian though. It was kind of like, how come you're not at Haskell?
Oh, how come you're not going to an Indian school? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is Hollywood, and but once I got to KU, it's like because of the small amount of people that were there, then it becomes the burden of the Indian student there. It's suddenly their responsibility as being unpaid to educate the rest of the campus. And that became really tiresome as well and really wore on me after a few years and kind of I don't know. I guess in my mind the effectiveness of that I just kind of it just kind of exhausted itself because I was spending all this time with people that were not even in from my community. Like it became it became a byproduct of just trying to graduate and do the it became a byproduct of the work that I was trying to do instead of being able to focus on the work that I was supposed to be doing.
But yet, I mean, there's only probably about 10 years between us, but
Yeah,
the internet changed everything. Because
yeah,
now you don't have to go and do your physical presentations all the time. You can reach a lot more people over the internet than you can going to school to school to school doing physical presentations for people. But that's a common thing that people are, Indian people are expected to do.
yeah, and that had a lot to do with I don't think it necessarily stopped the request for physical presentations. It probably amplified,
Yeah,
but
which is great.
you know, a byproduct of those amplifications was the having you know the internet definitely. I mean, it allows me to do it more efficiently, and it allows me to really focus on the community with that kind of work. Um, and if there's people outside of the community that are affected by that or exposed to it, then I can do that without having to spend a lot of energy on that space. Sorry, I'm
So,
charging my. That's why you hear beeping.
oh, okay. I was like, is that your microwave or what? But
No.
um, well, not only can you reach more people and do it in a more efficient way, but you've become quite politically active as well, and in a much more efficient way. So there's two main sort of political things that I've seen you involved in. The first thing I saw was the Redskins issue. So I live in Redskins country, and when my husband's full-blooded Prairie Band, he's half Prairie Band Potawatomi and half Northern Cheyenne, and I'm Choctaw on my mom's side, but I'm pretty much white, and my son saw the very first time he saw a Redskins logo, he pointed to it as a baby and he said, "Daddy." And then later on, when he was about 6 years old, he saw people at a Redskins game and the way that they behave. And he came to me and he said, "Mommy, why are they allowed to do that and nobody defends us?" He goes, "It really sucks being Indian." And, that's what I tell people is as a parent, you never want to hear your kid say something like that. And that's why it's important to address this issue. It has nothing to do with political correctness. It's about dehumanization and common human decency.
Whenever I was in Kansas, the Kansas City Chiefs are there, and I was at KU with Amanda Blackhorse. Whenever Susan Harjo lost the first round of cases
Right.
because of statute of limitations. So she had come back through the Midwest looking for people to sign on and needed people that were, I believe, 20 between 18 and 24. And I was 25 and Amanda was 24, so she signed on. We've been doing some organizational like protest stuff in and around the Kansas City Chiefs when they played the Redskins over there, and we had I don't know, we just had a group together. We're focusing on some specific things that we wanted to get done, and that was one of them. There was a small group of us that was in and around the Lawrence area that had come out of the First Nation Student Association there at KU. It was a pretty strong group. A lot of those people have gone on to do a lot of great things. Obviously, Amanda is one of those people. And and it was during my time in high school up there that the tomahawk chop became really popular, and which wasn't a cool time to be in high school
Not at all.
and be Indian.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the and my the arch rival of the high school that I went to had an Indian mascot. My high school didn't have an Indian mascot, but the arch rival did, and so routinely they had banners that hung in the middle of the school there that said "Kill the Indians" or "Scalp the Indians" and stuff like that. And there's only two Indian families there, and we both lived next door to each other. There's an Arapaho family and then our family. And so that was kind of, and my dad had been engaged in some of the protests there in Kansas City after we had moved up, and I guess throughout the course of my life, I've been in and around different political spheres or activist spheres, and so I don't really feel like any of the work that I've done is necessarily new. It's kind of more of a continuation or something that exists on that continuum. And just finding different ways to approach something. And that was kind of my where I had hit a kind of a aha moment, I guess, where in about the same time that Amanda signed on to that lawsuit, I decided to kind of step back away from the mascot issue a little bit, and that I didn't care about the mascot issue. It was more tied in the fact that a lot of the conversations that I was having with people, they were I don't know, they were like, if you stuck with them long enough, maybe like an hour, 2 hours, and you went through all of the data, and you went all through all of the situations and all of the PC answers, found at the bottom of that conversation, if you had convinced the person that these Indian mascots are not really good, they inevitably would ask, then what would be? And I graduating with a degree from KU in visual communications with an emphasis in graphic, which means, it's a long fancy way of saying that the people that are in my field working professionally are the people that are responsible for maintaining, creating, and supplementing, complementing, and disseminating all of the Indian mascot brands. And to look at these brands, or look at these images as brands, and look at the images as how they're maintained, and the space that they're already fighting in. And I decided that my efforts, because of that I'd gotten from school and from schooling that predated my time in college, I could more efficiently use it. I could use my time more efficiently to create brands, images, and parcels of media that essentially fight fire. Because and I mean, if we're being honest, there's not really any indigenous brands that compete, that are either executed with the same level of expertise, or disseminated with the same level of disseminated at the same level as any of the Indian mascot brands. They're not. It doesn't matter if they're racist. I'm talking about like just professional execution of that brand and then its dissemination. And so there's nothing. I mean, you point to Redskins, we have point to Kansas City Chiefs, you point to the Cleveland Indians, Florida Seminoles, on and on and on. And then you second tier, you go down to some other products, Land O'Lakes butters, Indian motorcycles, da 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 da. But as far as the indigenous brands, I mean, you don't. Those are almost non-existent. So one of the things that I started doing that time was rebranding, branding um, native nonprofits, native businesses, tribes, etc. So that the equity that they put behind those images and the execution that they put behind those images, those are their images. I mean, every time I take a project on like that, I want those projects to look like they were designed and created by the community itself. There's no sense if you research and you do every tribe has their own visual iconography, and so those things are theirs, and those are unique to that community. And so whenever you implement those brands and you hand that brand over to the community, and they put all their money behind it, they treat brands just like everyone else treats a brand. They puts it on their program T-shirts, goes on their letterheads, goes on their business cards, it's on their flags, everything. Those things become symbols of that community, and I don't think I just I didn't see that before. And the main reason you don't see that before is because I mean, probably, I don't know what the number is, but there's probably less than 20 indigenous graphic designers working in the country. And if there's more than that, I don't know who they are. And if they're working independently, that number is probably less than 10 and more likely to be around the number 5. Those things all serve to underserve indigenous, like, commercial iconography or their brand presence. And with a larger brand presence, I mean, Google works off of this because people work off this, and that is, if you create enough gravity on one particular pressure point on the internet, then Google finds you, and because people are finding you. And whenever you have that same conversation with somebody about what is good or what is properly executed brand, well, then you've got some things to point to. You've got a lot of things to point to. And they might not have the same amount of money behind them. They might not have the same amount of brand equity behind them, but that doesn't mean that they can't or that they won't one day, or that, that if one of these professional teams or an expansion team is thinking about, they're needing a rebrand or whatever, and they're trying to find something that exists in that space, well, the chances are they're not going to make the same mistakes that those other brands made, and either they will hopefully contact an indigenous graphic designer in order to facilitate that, and hopefully that person has the social whereabouts to not just do what they're told, and to actually supply input and execute. And most of the people that work on a really high level, they're aware of a lot more than just their own field.
Sure. And that's why you started Buffalo Nickel Creative. As you said, we need to start our own brands here. We need to let's stop being the one fighting these images, and create our own images to take over and represent who we really are.
Yeah, there's a quote by, I think, Aristotle, some old white guy. He said, if you want to tear down something old, then you have to build something new. And that's a simple idea, but I think it still holds weight, especially in this space, because I mean, if you have to have that stuff, and it has to be. We don't have to. it also falls in that conversation. Like we don't have to love something just because it's Indian. Like we should expect for it to be operating at a high level. There was a question that I think we fielded at one of the 1491s deals, and somebody asked who our favorite directors were or something, and like nobody that was in our group named anybody that was Indian. And we have to be okay with that. I mean, there's a lot of non-Indian directors that are really, really good, and we acknowledge their expertise and the level that they're operating at. It doesn't mean that we're unable to incorporate, the things that they do or say, or the methods, the tactics that they're using in their storytelling, into what we know. That's all part of that process. And just being, I guess, respectful of a craft, which, and that's the craft of design. And, understanding that those things have brand equity and not just trying to, you have to recognize whenever you approach somebody like that, you have to recognize that a lot of those people have just what essentially is brand loyalty. They don't care that, a lot of them don't care that it's Indian. This is like Dr. Pepper or Coca-Cola or Goodyear tires. It's like, that's theirs. And and any good brand, any well executed brand, facilitates that from their customers. And so the conversation has to be a little bit different. So, creating indigenous media and just the massive volume of it. And I mean, just as much indigenous media as you possibly can, because I think with the large quantity and quality of indigenous media, then whenever the larger media outlets have these conversations, then they are forced to reconcile those conversations against what that conversation looks like without an indigenous voice.
Right. So there's several different forms of alternative media, the Indian media being one, because people in Indian country said, hey, look, there's really nothing in the mainstream media about us, like nothing at all. So we're going to have to report on what's going on. And so then was born the Indian media. And I think that what you're doing with your design and branding is you're taking that to the next level. It doesn't only have to be media or news or reporting that we're doing, but it can be everything that we do.
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, when you think about let's just talk about information on a really, really basic level, and or education for that matter. And all that is it's the transference of information from one place to another place with the hope of modifying somebody's behavior or informing them in some way that allows them to have informed behaviors. And that's education, or I mean, advertising works on the same way, just any type of information dissemination. And so, having those touch points and those dissemination points is really key for the entire community. One, for us to talk to ourselves, but the larger that bandwidth is of that content, larger those conversations are, then maybe, if somebody gets called to be on the news as a talking head, or informed opinions or whatever, they're not just calling them for one thing, and that's the mascot issue. Or here, I'll give you an example of where this is kind of like, I guess, at the halfway point, is that with that Bundy takeover deal.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So there was all the media stuff that came out about the Paiute claims to that space as well. And over in Washington, the local media called or local regional media called Motika Wilbur. And Matika is a photographer. She's doing the 562 project where she goes to every community and takes photographs, and really great project. But she was trying to tell them, like, no, why are you calling me? I'm not Paiute. But the sense is that that was the Indian that they had heard about through media, and so that was the person that the media called, trying to get an opinion off that. And I'm sure she had an opinion, but she, at the same time, I guess, didn't feel like it was her place to talk for Paiutes. Um, but it's tipping that way. I mean, before, I don't think nobody would have called, but now they're, because of indigenous media presence, they're at least able to track down somebody that's not Sam Bradford or Sherman Alexie.
And
You know,
during a different month than November.
yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
amazing.
When I was at KU, we actually changed Native American Heritage Month from November to April, which is, our powwow was in April.
Cool.
We got there and was like, why is this in November? This is stupid. I'm not doing this. It's got midterms or whatever. So we moved it to April.
That's great. Yeah, that's the old joke. That's whenever we get a call to do a presentation. It's always in November. Um,
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know this, but Native American Day is actually the day after Thanksgiving, which everyone doesn't know is Native American Day. They know it as Black Friday.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the official federal national holiday. It's the Friday after Thanksgiving. And there was a news outlet that called me earlier this year about that and wanted a quote, and I gave him a quote, and I don't think it was a little bit too coarse to make it into the to make it into print. But I said by the time Native American Day rolls around, they would already have passed their Thanksgiving dinner, and not thought twice about it. Something like that. I think I was a little bit more vulgar, but I'm trying to PG it up. I was just in a mood.
Yeah, it does put you in a mood. Kind of like being invited to, your son's school to do a presentation, and then they have this little sort of, mythological story about the first Thanksgiving. And, you either break it to him like, hey, this is actually not even close to being true, or you play the game and just try to slip it in somehow, you know?
Yeah, I'm having different issues with our local school system here. They can't even spell principal correctly on the newsletter, so they
That happens.
received a grade, I think a D minus or something. So
Wow. Yeah. For me, it's my son's the only Indian in his school, so that's a heavy burden. And so I'm always trying to figure out different ways to lighten that load for him, because that's no fun.
yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, and that's part of life. And people telling him, you don't look Indian, stuff like that. He's like, really? Well, what do Indians look like? Hmm. That's the thing. And then for Indians that do, look like what non-Indian America thinks Indians should look like, it's like being a walking archetype, Everybody's just like, whoa, there's a real Indian. And my husband runs into that a lot. And when we first started dating, it was back when Dances with Wolves was out.
Uh-huh.
And people would come up to him in the street and they're like, dude, I saw you in Dances with Wolves. And they were totally serious, these people. And and he was and he'd be like, yeah, I played a Pawnee.
Well, I mean, that's part of the same conversation, though, is that the more indigenous media that's out there that just has people that look like the community out there, and people and are allowed to exist in that space, then it allows for that to stop happening. And I still have to deal with that only when I leave here, though. It's just it's just one of those things. And so, I mean, everybody puts that on the blood quantum conversation and all that, but hell is like, I guess I was born into the blood quantum conversation, or we all are. I'm not really sure. Um, I mean, there's nothing I can do about it, so I just try to focus on the work.
And approach it with humor.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
our community went through a reconstitution process about back in 2006, or between 2004 and 2006, and our community decided to go to descendancy, um, because I mean we're not a huge tribe, and a lot of us have married in to either non-Indians or tribes that are around, close to us. My wife's Pawnee and Yankton, and so now my kids are like 5 or 6 different tribes now.
right.
So,
Yeah.
without descendancy, if you're not just going lineal descent, then you're going to get mathematically out of the conversation, or politically out of the conversation through mathematics.
Right, and that I mean that is the point of the government policy of blood quantum. We think it's about tribes having the right to decide who their members are, which they already have without blood quantum laws, right? But
Yeah,
but really, it's about tracking. It's the old "let's breed them out of existence." That's actual Indian policy,
yeah,
government policy. So that's what that's all about. But it has a really destructive, by design effect in communities where we play that game. I'm more Indian than you, and it's divide and conquer. But inside Indian communities, divide
yeah.
and conquer. Yeah. So, living in Indian country, you can't really help but get involved in political happenings. Everything really that you do is sort of a political act, really, either internally, externally, or both. And everything you do is, the people are watching. They're counting on you to represent in a good way, as they say. So that's just a little bit of pressure, just a little bit.
Well, it's. I think if you're Indian, you're already inherently political. You don't really have a choice in it. I mean, I live on trust land right now. I'm part of our village board, and um, I'm trying to undo some. I mean, in order for this is a local government position that I hold. It's not huge, but in order to navigate that space, you got to know at least 3 or 4 federal laws pretty good, and several CFRs and tribal law and how all that stuff works out. And some of it hasn't been worked out. So, um, you really have to kind of probably know more than the local law enforcement about the space that you're on, so that you can navigate that space and create solutions inside of that space for your community.
Well, they don't make it easy. Um, they
No,
really
it's not
don't.
easy.
Uh, it, Indian trust land is the worst bureaucratic nightmare ever, ever, and that's by design as well. And it keeps communities in poverty as well, because what is your base of prosperity? It's your land. If you can't use your land the way you need to, then you're screwed. My husband can't even know who else has his trust land with him. That's somehow not his right to know.
Well, you'll be in. You have to pass this on to him. There's an Osage case actually that was I guess had a big breakthrough last week. That's this case called the Fletcher case, and there was all these non-Indians that hold uh, rights or head rights, tribal trust head rights to our oil mineral reserve. And for a long time, the BIA wouldn't release who those people were so that they could even be sued. And they finally did, and it was an outdated list. So uh, they they came around, and they were actually the tribe won the case. So you might have some luck there now.
Oh, okay, good, good.
It only took 20 years though.
Right, right. And then, the whole Coble settlement really plays into this too. So not only is all this land held in trust, where natives can do very little, and it's all sort of, bureaucratically managed really, really badly by the federal government. But then they lease all this space out, all this land out to non-Indian ranchers and farmers and what have you for pennies on the dollar. All this money goes into trust accounts, and then oops, it's gone. It went into the general fund. Whoopsie doopsie doo.
Yeah,
You're getting pennies, but we're going to steal all that from you too. So, it's pretty annoying
that's pretty
situation.
standard.
Yeah, totally. Steal from the poorest. And then there was that story that came out a couple years ago about the Koch brothers and their oil company. They rigged
Yeah,
their
that was with our tribe.
was it?
Yeah,
Wow. So they were stealing oil by rigging their actual machines when they were taking the oil out and
yeah.
paying less than what they owed. So I'm sure there was no consequence for that, really, was there? Maybe a few fines,
No, there was a settlement. They settled.
settlement.
Yeah, they
Yeah, no,
settled.
they should have gotten jail time.
Yeah, that was early 2000s, I think. I think
Yeah,
that's when that occurred. Yeah.
and I'm sure there's other things that are going on now because it's always going on, always.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other big sort of socio-political involvement that you've had and you've used your art is with the passage of the Violence Against Women Act. Your poetry got involved in convincing its passage. So tell us how that happened.
I got I got invited. I will. Let me back up a little bit. Whenever me and Dallas wrote and shot Geronimo EKIA, about a few days after it went out, I got a call. I was at ceremony out in Gray Horse, and I wasn't answering my phone. So this somebody got in touch with one of our former chiefs, and then he called my dad, and then my dad tracked me down out there. But it was from Senator Akaka's office, who was the chair of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs for a while, and they were holding a hearing on the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and wanted to know if I'd be interested in testifying. And so I flew out there, got put on the little deal there, the little stand. I guess it's a stand. I don't know. It's just a table and chair in front of the Senate committee there. But they, I spent the majority of my time, I guess, talking about some of the violence against women issues, and mainly like focused in on jurisdictional issues and oversight. Mainly because I have a house next door that was used to be used for cooking methamphetamines, and federal government, they've, assumed responsibility over that legal space, and this individual was being arrested and then let go and arrested and let go and arrested and let go. So this really quickly spinning cycle of meth and then not meth and then meth being cooked next door to me was ongoing. And So I just said, if you want to implement these rules, a good way would be to let us handle it in the community, because the federal government is not handling it at all. It's not it's not being adjudicated. It's that stuff's getting dropped. Plea deals are happening, whatever, but nothing. The result is nothing. The result is absolutely nothing. And I rolled that in with violence against women statistics, and one of the other people that was sitting on the panel with me was the individual that's the executive director from the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and they had some money that they used to facilitate making media pieces to push this issue because it was at that point at a standstill in the House and in the Senate, and so that's what happened. Is he just hit me up and gave me a lot of leeway about what to do, and they just said they trusted me, and so that video, the Indigenous woman video, was kind of the first one of those pieces that I did for them. That I think I ended up doing probably like 15 pieces for them, but that was probably the one where they gave me the most amount of latitude in order to execute it, and really it's it's to use for practitioners and all that kind of stuff. But just like any advertising campaign, and I've got 3 daughters, so this issue is really close to me. But just like any advertising campaign, before I go about trying to come up with a strategy or a plan, I kind of looked and saw what was out there, and what I found as far as existing materials was really to a certain level where this is not, I don't mean just Indian, I mean everybody, the domestic violence materials that we're targeting at everybody. They really I thought were insulting or offensive or even patronizing, in the sense that in every ad campaign has a target, and you establish a target and you work on that target, and that target is what you've identified as your call to action, or what you want to change. And what I saw in all these existing advertising campaigns was the fact that these were all targeted at women, and women were not the source of the problem. The advertising was like, you don't have to take it anymore, call us for help. That's not love, that's not respect, and all those things are true, but that's a lot of money to be talking to the victim after it's already happened. It's a lot of money to be spending on advertising, talking to the victim after there's nothing that they can do about it other than try to facilitate some type of healing. It doesn't fix jurisdictional issues. It doesn't address jurisdictional issues. It doesn't talk to the perpetrator. And so, I really feel like I wanted to go in that direction, which is where I thought the source of the issue was wrapped up. I mean, you can't make poems about Oliphant. It's not really like a lot of words that rhyme with Oliphant, elephant. But the issue remains, and the pressure points that they were putting on them in the Senate and the House dealt with those technicalities. All I needed to do was get them emotionally engaged and emotionally involved in the legal discrepancies that allow that stuff to happen, and the social functions that are at play that allow that stuff to happen. So, you start getting in there and fiddling around with it, and you still want to make something that doesn't, you don't want to leave people in a sense of hopelessness, which is really easy to do inside that conversation. So you got to run them through the problems and then provide the solution as well. In advertising, they say you tell them, and then you remind them, and then you tell them again. And so, and even in movies, you got to allow them that space. All movies, doesn't matter if it's a comedy or a drama or an action movie. Within those scripts, in order to really engage somebody, you have to really hit on almost every single possible human emotion in order to make that real to them. And so that's what, you try to make them. You want people to get angry. You want people to get sad. You want people to be shocked. And then you want to give them a reason to smile and to hope for something. And so that's why in that video, it starts off. We started shooting at 5 o'clock in the morning before the sun came up, and we shot until 10 o'clock in the morning when the sun was up. And it just shows a girl that's in darkness, but the violence has already occurred. And what you see is the community trying to do something about it. That the only thing that they can do or they know how to do that's within their power to do, and that's to come to that person's aid and help them and just be with them. And that's what we have, that's what we're left with as humans against the backdrop of, the jurisdictional cluster that we're having to deal with.
Some of that got fixed, yeah, but not all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that eventually got to the floor, and they voted on, there was a handful of issues that were holding it back. The native jurisdictional one was one of them. Abuse within same-sex relationships was another. And then immigrants, reporting domestic violence, providing protection for undocumented individuals that were experiencing abuse, at the hands of either undocumented or documented individuals. So, those were the things that kind of tied it up. The native provisions got included. The bill went to the floor with them out, and it failed, and then another one went immediately afterwards with them in it, and it succeeded. And I just remember people just being so happy about that. And then, now we've passed the time where those implementations have taken root, and hopefully either through the courts or through additional laws, we'll be able to expand that beyond just jurisdictional, beyond just rape and sexual violence, and over to other major crimes.
Right. Yeah. So the tribal government should be able to protect their tribal lands and tribal people, whatever crime happens. But there's a lot that gets in the way of that. And I really think that it was held up because, here are these privileged, right-wing white guys who said, "Oh, wait a minute," really what they were afraid of was non-natives being treated in a tribal court like natives are treated in non-native courts. That's really what they were worried about, weren't they?
Yeah, and during that same time period, in between the time that it first went to the floor and failed, and before it came back to the floor and succeeded, I travel a lot, and as fate would have it, I ended up sitting next to Senator Tom Coburn on a flight back to Tulsa, and I asked him, I said, "How come you voted against the Violence Against Women Act?" And he got really kind of, I would say, it's fair to say animated. I'm sure if you asked him, he would say, he might have another word, but there's for sure you could say animated.
Okay.
And he said, "You will never, ever be able to arrest a white man on Indian land. That is never going to happen. Never, ever. It's not going to happen, ever. That's never going to happen."
Wow.
And he was really adamant about it. And you know what? He's a senator, and he was wrong because it passed.
Yeah.
We watched it pass. And,
so, do you think that it will ever expand further, like soon, or do you think it's going to take just as much of a fight every step of the way?
Well, there's two ways that it could expand, and I don't know what the strategy is. You'd have to talk to some of the people that were working in on that. Um, but one would be to get additional laws passed that mirrored those of the VAWA fix, the jurisdictional fix for the other major crimes. Um, the other one would be through the court system, but the court system has been excruciatingly hostile towards Indian cases, especially I think in the last 20 or 30 years. We've had some wins, yes, but by and large, I guess the judicial part of executing already existing Indian law or taking precedent, it just doesn't. I would probably recommend tribes do not go to the court system to try to fix anything. That being said, this law is pretty recent and pretty explicit in what it laid out. So you could potentially see a case where a tribe did arrest a non-Indian, and if they had laws on their own books, tried them for murder or whatever, and that case would then probably also simultaneously be kicked out to a federal or state case or whatever the situation calls for that normally handles those cases. It would be federal, but where that question could be brought forward, and you could use precedent of the recent VAWA bill to expand, that. I mean, it could be a case that is as unconfusing or horrific as a sexual assault that results in a death. So, I mean, it's not that that's I guess those lines are not as clearly defined as maybe one would think. I mean, at that point, what are they going to do? Are they going to try the sexual assault part in tribal court and then try the murder case in federal? Like, see, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Really quick, it starts to not make sense, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think you could make a strong case to say, well, you know, this needs to include all these. But that being said, the way that the courts have treated Indians lately in Indian cases, I would probably just encourage communities to go through Congress and the Senate, although that's a huge uphill battle and it'll take a lot of money and take a lot of time and a lot of resources. That's really the only space in which you're going to be able to get what you want out of that.
And is it still only domestic partners of non-native domestic partners of natives on native land that can be prosecuted by tribal?
No, I think it's any non-Indian that commits a sexual violence act on trust land.
Oh, okay. Whether the victim is native or non-native.
I believe so.
Okay. Wow, that's good. That's a good step forward.
If it, if they're non-native, I think probably most of the tribes will just kick it out to a state if it's a public, where they have public 184 or whatever it is.
Okay. Well, shoot, looks like we're at the end here. I'm glad that you joined me. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem.